Okay, so where are they at now? I'm trying to. Okay, there you go. They are here, right here. To Morea Gate. Uh, that's there, right there. There's that little gate right there. Little gate's right here. Gimlet Dale is right here. Okay. We're on page 302. And let's see. I'm gonna start at the beginning at the top, and then go from there to hopefully we'll see what happens. Okay, this is Chapter 4, A Journey in the Dark. Page 302 from the book 2, The Two Towers, within the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Okay, so here we go. And there the gate stood once upon a time, the elven door at the end of the road from Holland by which we have come. But this way is blocked. None of the company, I guess, will wish to swim this gloomy water at the end of the day. It has an unwholesome look. We must find a way round the northern edge, said Gimli. The first thing for the company to do is to climb up the main path and see where that would lead us. Even if there were no lake, we could not get our baggy pony up the stair. But in any case, we cannot take the poor beast into the mines, said Gandalf. The road under the mountains is a dark road, and there are places narrow and steep which he cannot tread, even if we can. Poor old Bill, said Frodo. I had not thought of that. And poor Sam. I wonder what he will say. I am sorry, said Gandalf. Poor Bill has been a useful companion. But it goes to my heart to turn him adrift now. I would have traveled lighter and brought no animal, least of all this one that Sam is fond of. If I had my way, I feared all along that we should be obliged to take this road. The day was drawing to its end, and cold stars were glinting in the sky high above the sunset, when the company, with all the speed they could, climbed up the slopes and reached the side of the lake. In breadth it looked to be no more than 2 or 3 furlongs at the widest point. How far it stretched away southward they could not see. From in the failing light, but its northern end was no more than a half a mile from where they stood, and between the stony ridges that enclosed the valley and the water's edge, there was a rim of open ground. They hurried forward, for they had still a mile or two to go before they could reach the point on the far shore that Gandalf was making for. And then he had still to find the doors. When they came to the northernmost center corner of the lake, they found a narrow creek that barred their way. It was green and stagnant, thrust out like a slimy arm towards the enclosing hills. Gimli strode forward, undeterred, and found that the water was shallow, no more than ankle deep at the edge. Behind him they walked in file, threading their way with care, for under the weedy pools were sliding and greasy stones, and footing was treacherous. Frodo shuddered with disgust at the touch of the dark, unclean water on his feet. As Sam, the last of the company, led Bill up on the to the dark to the dry ground, on the far side, there came a soft sound, a swish, followed by a plop, as if a fish had disturbed the still surface of the water. Turning quickly, they saw ripples, black edged with shadow in the waning light. Great rings were winding outwards from a point far out in the lake. There was a bubbling noise, and then silence. The dusk deepened, and the last gleams of the sunset were veiled in cloud. Gandalf now pressed on at a great pace, and the others followed as quickly as they could. They reached a strip of dry land between the lake and the cliffs. It was narrow, often hardly a dozen yards across and encumbered with fallen rock and stones, but they found a way. Hugging the cliff and keeping as far from the dark water as they might. A mile southwards along the shore they came upon holly trees. Stumps and dead boughs were rotting in the shallows. The remains, it seemed, of old thickets are up a hedge that had once lined the road across the drowned valley. But close under the cliff there stood, still strong and living, two tall trees, larger than any trees of holly that Frodo had ever seen or imagined. Their great roots spread from the wall to the water. Under the looming cliffs, they had looked like mere bushes when seen far off from the top of the stair. But now they are towered overhead, stiff, dark, and silent, throwing deep night shadows about their feet, standing like sentinel pillars at the end of the road. Well, here we are at last, said Gandalf. Here the elven way from Holland ended. Holly was a token of the people of that land, and they planted it here to mark the end of their domain. For the west door was made chiefly for their use in the traffic with the lords of Moria. Those were happier days when there was close friendship at times between folk of different race, even between dwarves and elves. It was not the fault of the dwarves that the friendship waned, said Gimli. I have not heard that it was the fault of the elves, said Legolas. I have heard both, said Gandalf, and I will not give judgment now. But I beg you to, Legolas and Gimli, at least to be friends. And to help me, I need you both. The doors are shut and hidden, and the sooner we find them, the better. Night is at hand. Turning to the others, he said, while I am searching, will you each make ready to enter the mines? For here, I fear we must say farewell to our good beast of burden. You must lay aside much of the stuff that we brought against bitter weather. You will not need it inside, nor I hope, when we come through and journey on down into the south. Instead, each of us must take a share of what the pony carry, especially the food and the water skins. But you can't leave poor old Bill behind in this forsaken place, Mr. Gandalf, cried Sam, angry and distressed. I won't have it, and that's flat. After he has come so far and all. I am so sorry, Sam, said the wizard. But when the door opens, I do not think you will be able to drag your bill inside into the long, dark Moria. You will have to choose between Bill and your master. He'd follow Mr. Frodo into a dragon's den if I let him, protested Sam. And it'd be nothing short of murder to turn him loose with all these wolves about. It would be short of murder, I hope, said Gandalf. He laid his hand on the pony's head and spoke in a low voice. Go with words of guard and guiding on you, he said. You are a wise beast and have learned much in Rivendell. Make your ways to places where you can find grass, and so come in time to Elrond's house, or wherever you wish to go. There, Sam, he will have quite as much chance of escaping wolves and getting home as we have. Sam stood sullenly by the pony and returned no answer. Bill, seeming to understand well what was going on, nuzzled up to him, putting his nose to Sam's ear. Sam burst into tears and fumbled with the straps, unlading all the pony's packs and throwing them on the ground. The others sorted out the goods, making a pile of all that could be left behind, and dividing the rest. When this was done, they turned to watch Gandalf. He appeared to have nothing. He was standing between the two trees, gazing at the blank wall of the cliff, as if he would bore a hole into it with his eyes. Gimli was wandering about, tapping the stone here and there with his axe. Legolas was pressed against the rock, as if listening. Okay. Well, Here we are, and already, said Mary. But where are the doors? I can't see any sign of them. Dwarf doors are not made to be seen when shut, said Gimli. They are invisible, and their own makers cannot find them or open them if their secret is forgotten. But this door was not made to be secret, known only to dwarves, said Gandalf, coming suddenly to life and turning around, unless things are altogether changed. Eyes that know what to look for may discover the signs. But this door was not made to be secret only to dwarves, said Gandalf, coming suddenly to life and turning around. Unless things are altogether changed, eyes that know what to look for may discover the signs. He walked forward to the wall. Right between the shadow of the trees, there was a smooth space, and over this he passed his hands to and fro, muttering words under his breath. And then he stepped back. Look, he said, can you see anything now? Hmm. The moon now shone upon the gray face of the rock, but they could see nothing else for a while. And slowly on the surface where the wizard's hands had passed, faint lines appeared, like slender veins of silver running in the stone. At first, they were no more than pale gossamer threads, so fine that they only twinkled fitfully where the moon caught them. But steadily they grew broader and clearer until the design could be guessed. At the top, not as high as Gandalf could reach, was an arch of interlacing letters in the elfish character. Below, though the threads were in places blurred or broken, the outline could be seen on an anvil and a hammer surmounted by a crown with 7 stars. Beneath these, again, were 2 trees, each bearing crescent moons. More clear than all else there shone forth in the middle of the door a single star with many rays. There are the emblems of Durin, cried Gimli, and there is the tree of the high elves, said Legolas, and the star of the house of Fëanor, said Gandalf. They are wrought in Inhullin that mirrors only starlight and moonlight and sleeps until it is touched by one who speaks words now long forgotten in Middle Earth. It is long since I heard them, and I thought deeply before I could recall them to my mind. What does the writing say? Asked Frodo, who was trying to decipher the inscription on the arch. I thought I knew the elf letters, but I cannot read these. The words are in elfin tongue of the west of Middle Earth in the elder days, answered Gandalf. But they do not say anything of importance to us. They say only, the doors of Durin, Lord of Moria, speak, friend, and enter. and underneath small and faint is written, I, Narvi, made them. Cerebor of Holland drew these signs. What does that mean by speak, friend, and enter? Asked Mary. That is plain enough, said Gimli. If you are friends, speak the password, and the doors will open and you can enter. Yes, said Gandalf. These doors are probably governed by words. Some dwarf gates will open only at special times or for particular persons, and some have locks and keys that are still needed when all necessary times and words are known. These doors have no key. In the days of Durin, they were not secret. They usually stood open and door wards sat here. But if they were shut, any who knew the opening word could speak it and pass in. At least so it is recorded, is it not, Gimli? It is, said the dwarf. But what word was not remembered? Narvi and his craft and all the kindred have vanished from the earth. But do not you know the word, Gandalf? Asked Boromir. In surprise, no, said the wizard. The others looked dismayed. Only Aragorn, who knew Gandalf well, remained silent and unmoved. Then what was the use of bringing us to this accursed spot? Cried Boromir, glancing back with a shudder at the dark water. You told us that you had once passed through the vines. How could that be, if you did not know how to enter? The answer to your first question, Boromir, said the wizard, is that I do not know the word yet. But we shall soon see. And, he added, with a glint in his eyes under the bristling brows, you may ask what is the use of my deeds when they are proved useless. As for your other question, do you doubt my tale, or do you have no wits left? I did not enter this way. I came from the east. If you wish to know, I will tell you that these doors open outwards. From the inside, you may thrust them open with your hands. From the outside, nothing will move them save the spell of command. They cannot be forced inwards. What are you going to do then? Asked Pippin, undaunted by the wizard's bristling brows. Knock on the doors with your head, Peregrine took. No. What are you going to do then? Asked Pippin, undaunted by the wizard's bristling brows. Knock on the doors with your head, Peregrine took, said Gandalf. But if that does not shatter them, then I am allowed a little peace from foolish questions. I will seek for the opening words. I once knew every spell in the tongues of elves or men or orcs that was ever used for such a purpose. I could still remember 10 score of them without searching in my mind. But only a few trials, I think, will be needed. And I shall not have to call on Gimli for words of the secret dwarf tongue that they teach to none. The opening words were elfish, like the writing on the arch that seemed certain. He stepped up to the rock again and lightly touched it with the staff, the silver star in the middle beneath the sign of the anvil. Anon Elun Edro he Amen. Finis Norgrim Lasso Ben Lamet, he said in a commanding voice. The silver lines faded, but the blank gray stone did not stir. Many times he repeated these words in different order, or varied them. Then he tried other spells, one after another, speaking now faster and louder, now soft and slow. And then he spoke many single words of elfish speech. Nothing happened. The cliff towered into the night, and countless stars were kindled. The wind blew cold, and the door stood fast. Again, Gandalf approached the wall and lifting up his arms, he spoke in tones of command and rising wrath. Edro, Edro, he cried, and struck the rock with the staff. Open, open, he shouted, and followed it with the same command in every language that he ever been spoken in the west of Middle Earth. And then he threw his staff on the ground and sat down in silence. At that moment, from far off the wind bore to their listening ears of the howling of wolves. Bill and the pony started in fear, and Sam sprang to his side and whispered softly to him. At that moment, from far off the wind bore to their listening ears the howling of wolves. Bill the pony started in fear, and Sam sprang to his side and whispered softly to him. Do not let him run away, said Boromir. It seems that we shall need him still, if the wolves do not find us. Oh, how I hate this foul pool. He stooped and picking up a large stone, he cast it far into the dark water. The stone vanished with a soft slap, but at the same instant there was a swish and a bubble. Great rippling rings formed on the surface. Out beyond where the stone had fallen. And they moved slowly towards the foot of the cliff. Why did you do that, Boromir? Said Frodo. I hate this place too, and I'm afraid. I don't know what. Not of wolves. Or the dark behind the doors, but of something else. I am afraid of the pool. Don't disturb it. I wish we could get away, said Merry. Why doesn't Gandalf do something quick, said Pippin. Gandalf took no notice of them. He sat with his head bowed, either in despair or in anxious thought. The mournful howling of the wolves was heard again, and the ripples of the water grew and came closer. Some were already lapping on the shore. With the suddenness that startled the wizard sprang to his feet. He was laughing. I have it, he cried. Of course, of course. Absurdly simple, like most riddles when you see the answer. Picking up his staff, he stood before the rock and said in a clear voice, Melon! The stars shone out briefly and faded again. And suddenly a great doorway was outlined, though not a crack or joint had been visible before. Slowly it divided in the middle and swung outwards inch by inch until both doors lay back against the wall. Through the opening, and a shadowy stair could be seen climbing steeply up, but beyond the lower steps the darkness was deeper than night. The company stared in wonder. I was wrong after all, said Gandalf, and Gimli too. Mary, of all people, was on the right track. The opening word was inscribed on the archway all the time. The translation should have been say, friend, and enter. I had only to speak the elfish word for friend, and the doors opened. Quite simple. Too simple for a learned lore master in these suspicious days. Those were happier times. Now let us go. He strode forward and set his foot on his lower step. But at that moment, several things happened. Frodo felt something seize him by the ankle and fell with a cry. Bill the pony gave a wild neigh of fear and turned tail and dashed away along the lakeside into the darkness. Sam leaped after him, and then hearing Frodo's cry, he ran back again, weeping and cursing. The others swung around and saw the waters of the lake seething as if a host of snakes were swimming up from the southern end. And out from the water a long sinuous tentacle had crawled, and it was pale green and luminous and wet. Its fingered end had hold of Frodo's foot and was dragging him into the water. Sam, on his knees, was now slashing at it with a knife. The arm let go of Frodo, and Sam pulled him away, crying out for his help. 20 other arms came rippling out. The dark water boiled, and there was a hideous stench. "Into the gateway! Up the stairs, quick!" shouted Gandalf, leaping back, rousing them from the horror that seemed to have rooted all but Sam to the ground, where they stood. He drove them forward. They were just in time. Sam and Frodo were only a few steps up, and Gandalf had just begun to climb. And when the groping tentacles writhed across the narrow shore and fingered the cliff wall and the doors, one came wriggling over the threshold, glistening in the starlight. Gandalf turned and paused. If he was considering what word would close the gate again from within, there was no need. Many cooling arms seized the doors on either side, and with a horrible swing, swung them around. With a shattering echo, they slammed, and all light was lost. A noise of rending and crashing came dully through the ponderous stone. Sam, clinging to Frodo's arm, collapsed on a step in the black darkness. Poor old Bill, he said in a choking voice. Poor old Bill. Wolves and snakes, but the snakes were too much for him. I had to choose, Mr. Frodo. I had to come with you. They heard Gandalf go back down the steps and thrust his staff against the doors, but there was a quiver in the stone, and the stairs trembled, but the doors did not open. Well, well, said the wizard. The passage is blocked behind us now, and there's only one way out. On the other side of the mountains, I fear from the sounds that boulders have been piled up and the tree roots uprooted and thrown across the gate. I am sorry, for the trees were beautiful and had stood for so long. I felt that something horrible was near the moment that my foot first touched the water, said Frodo. But what was the thing? Or were there many of them? I do not know, answered Gandalf, but the arms were all guided by one purpose. Something has crept or has been driven out of dark waters under the mountains. There are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world. He did not speak aloud. He thought that whatever it was that dwelt in the lake, it had seized on Frodo first among all the company. Boromir muttered under his breath, but the echoing stone magnified the sound to a hoarse whisper that all could hear in the deep places of the world. And thither we are going against my wish. Who will lead us now in this deadly dark? I will, said Gandalf, and Gimli shall walk with me. Follow my staff. As the wizard passed on ahead up the great steps, he held his staff aloft, and from its tip there came a faint radiance. The wide stairway was sound and undamaged. 200 steps they counted, broad and shallow, and at the top they found an arched passage with a level floor leading on into the dark. Let us sit and rest and have something to eat here on the landing, since we can't find a dining room, said Frodo. He had begun to shake off the terror of the clutching arm, and suddenly he felt extremely hungry. The proposal was welcomed by all, and they sat down on the upper steps, dim figures in the gloom. After they had eaten, Gandalf gave them a third sip of the Mirror of Rivendell. It will not last much longer, I am afraid, he said. But I think we need it after the horror at the gate. And unless we have great luck, we shall need all that is left before we see the other side. Go carefully with the water, too. There are many streams and wells in the mines, but they should not be touched. We may not have a chance of filling our skins in bottles till we have come down into Dimrill Dale. Right here. That's the Moria Gate. And this is Dimrill Dale. This is, yeah. Hmm. How long is that going to take us? Asked Frodo. I cannot say, answered answered Gandalf. It depends on many chances. But going straight without mishap or losing our way, we shall take 3 or 4 marches. I expect it can't not be less than 40 miles from West Door to East Gate in a direct line, and the road may wind much. After only a brief rest, they started on their way again. All were eager to get the journey over as quickly as possible, and were willing, tired as they were, to go on marching still for several hours. Gandalf walked in front as before. In his left hand he held up a glimmering staff, the light of which just showed the ground before his feet. In his right he held a sword, lambered. Behind him came Gimli, with his eyes gleaming in the dim light as he turned his head from side to side. Behind the dwarf walked Frodo, and he had drawn the short sword, Sting. No gleam came from the blades of Sting or from Glamdrick, and that was some comfort, for being the work of elfish smiths in the elder days. These swords shone with cold light. If any orcs were near at hand, behind Frodo went Sam, and after him Legolas and the young hobbits, and Boromir. In the dark at the rear, grim and silent, walked Aragorn. The passage twisted around a turn and then began to descend. It went steadily down for a long while before it became level once again. The air grew hot and stifling, but it was not foul, and at times they felt currents of cooler air upon their faces. Issuing from half-gassed openings in the walls. There were many of these. In the pale ray of the wizard's staff, Frodo caught glimpses of stairs and arches and other passages and tunnels, sloping up or running steeply down, or opening blankly dark on either side. It was bewildering beyond hope of remembering. Gimli aided Gandalf very little, except by his stout courage. At least he was not, as were most of the others, troubled by the mere darkness in itself. Often the wizard consulted him at points where the choice of way was doubtful, but it was always Gandalf who had the final word. The mines of Moria were vast and intricate beyond the imagination of Gimli. Glowing sun, dwarf of the mountain race through he though he was. To Gandalf, the far off memories of a journey long before were now of little help. But even in the gloom, and despite all windings of the road, he knew whither he wished to go, and he did not falter as long as there was a path that led towards his goal. Mhm. Don't be afraid, said Aragorn. There was a pause, longer than usual, and Gandalf and Gimli were whispering together. The others were crowded behind, waiting anxiously. Don't be afraid, I have been with you. On many a journey, if never on one so dark, and there are tales in Rivendell of greater deeds of his than any that I have seen. He will not go astray. If there is any path to find, he has led us in here against our fears. But he will lead us out again at whatever cost to himself. He is sure of finding the way home in a blind light than the cats of Queen Rudell. Well, it was well for the company that they had such a guide. They had no fuel nor any means of making torches. In the desperate scramble at the doors, many things had been left behind. But without any light, they would soon have come to grief. There were not only many roads to choose from, but there were also in many places holes and pitfalls, and dark wells beside the path in which their passing feet echoed. There were fissures and chasms in the walls and floor, and every now and then a crack would open right before their feet. The widest was more than 7 feet across, and it was long before Pippin could summon enough courage to leap over the dreadful gap. The noise of churning water came up from far below as the great mill wheel was turning in the depths. Well, muttered Sam, I knew I'd want it if I hadn't got it. As these dangers became frequent, their march became slower. They had already, they seemed to have been tramping on and on endlessly to the mountain's roots. They were more than weary, and yet there seemed no comfort in the thought of halting anywhere. Frodo's spirits had risen for a while after his escape, and after food and a draught of the cordial, but now a deep uneasiness, growing to dread, crept over him again, though he had been healed in Rivendell. A knife stroke, that grim wound had not been without effect. His senses were sharper and more aware of things that could not be seen. One sign of change that he soon had noticed was that he could see more in the dark than any of his companions, save perhaps Gandalf, and he was in any case the bearer of the ring. It hung on his chain against his breast, and at times it seemed a heavy weight. He felt the certainty of evil ahead and of evil following. But he said nothing. He gripped tighter on the hilt of his sword and went on doggedly. The company behind him spoke seldom, and then only in hurried whispers. There was no sound but the sound of their own feet. The dull stump of Gimli's dwarf boots, the heavy tread of Boromir, the light step of Legolas, the soft, scarce heard patter of hobbit feet, and in the rear the slow, firm footfalls of Aragorn with his long stride. When they halted for a moment, they heard nothing at all, unless it were occasionally a faint trickle and drip of unseen water. Yet Frodo began to hear, or to imagine that he heard something else, like the faint fall of soft bare feet. It was never loud enough or near enough for him to feel certain that he had heard it. But once it had started, it never stopped. While the company was moving, it was not an echo, or, or when they halted it, padded on for a while all by itself, and then grew still. Okay, I'm going to stop here on 312. And let's see, after that, it's going to be 1, 2, 3. 4 pages. Wow, maybe we should just go ahead and keep going. Okay, just 4 more pages. Let's just go ahead and just knock this out right now. Okay, well, it was after nightfall when they had entered the mines. They had been going for several hours with only brief halts when Gandalf came to his first curious chat. Before him stood a wide, dark arch opening into 3 passages. All led to the same general direction, eastwards, but the left-hand passage plunged down, while the right-hand climbed up, and the middle way seemed to run on, smooth and level, but very narrow. Uh, I have no memory of this place at all, said Gandalf, standing uncertainly under the arch. He held up his staff in the hope of finding some marks or inscription that might help his choice. But nothing of the kind was to be seen. I am too wary to decide, he said, shaking his head, and I expect that you are all as wary as I am, or warier. We had better halt here for what is left of the night. You know what I mean. In here it is ever dark, but outside the late moon is riding westward, and the middle night has passed. Poor old Bill, said Sam. Oh, I wonder where he is. I hope those wolves haven't gotten to him yet. To the left of the great arch, they found a stone door. It was half closed, but swung back easily to a gentle thrust. Beyond there seemed to lie a wide chamber cut in the rock. Steady, steady, cried Gandalf as Merry and Pippin pushed forward, glad to find where they could rest with at least more feeling of shelter than in the open passage. Steady, you do not know what is inside yet. I will go first. He went in cautiously, and the others followed behind. There, he said, pointing with his staff to the middle of the floor. Before his feet, they saw a large round hole like the mouth of a well. Broken and rusty chains lay at the edge and trailed down the black into the black pit. Fragments of stone lay near. One of you might have fallen in and still be wondering when you were going to strike the bottom, said Aragorn to Merry. Let the guide go first while you have one. This seems to have been a guard room, made for the watching of the three passages, said Gimli. That hole was plainly a well for the guards' use, covered with a stone lid. But the lid is broken, and we must all take care in the dark. Pippin felt curiously attracted by the well, while the others were unrolling blankets and making beds against the walls of the chamber. As far as possible from the hole in the floor, he crept to the edge and peered over. A chill air seemed to strike his face, rising from invisible depths. Moved by a sudden impulse, he groped for a loose stone and let it drop. Oh, yeah. He felt his heart beat many times before there was any sound. Then far below, as the stone had fallen into deep and water in some cavernous place, there was a there came a plump, a very distant but magnified and repeated in the hollow shaft. What's that? Cried Gandalf. He was relieved when Pippin confessed what he had done, but he was angry, and Pippin could see his eye glinting. Full of a took, he growled. This is a serious journey, but not a hobbit walking party. Throw yourself in time, and then you will be no further nuisance. Now be quiet. Nothing more was heard for several minutes. But then there came out of the depths faint knocks. Tom, tap, tap, Tom. They stopped, and when the echoes died away, they were repeated. Tap, Tom, Tom, tap, 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 Tom. They sounded disquietly like signals of some sort, but after a while the knocking died away and was not heard again. That was the sound of a hammer, or I have never heard one, said Gimli. Yes, said Gandalf, and I do not like it. It may have nothing to do with Peregrine's foolish stone, and probably something has been stirred that would have been better left quiet. Pray, do nothing of the kind again. Let us hope we shall get some rest without further trouble. You, Pippin, can go on the first watch as a reward, he growled as he rolled himself in a blanket. Pippin sat miserably by the door in the pitch dark, but he kept on turning around, fearing that some unknown thing would crawl up out of the well. He wished he could cover the hole, if only with a blanket. But he dared not move or go near it, even though Gandalf seemed to be asleep. Actually, Gandalf was awake, though lying still and silent. He was deep in thought, trying to recall every memory of his former journey in the mines and considering anxiously the next course that he should take. A false turn now might be disastrous. After an hour, he rose up and came over to Pippin. Get into a corner and have a sleep, my lad, he said in a kindly tone. You want to sleep, I expect? I cannot get awake, so I may as well do the watching. I, I know what is the matter with me, he muttered as he sat down by the door. I need smoke. I have not tasted it since the morning before the snowstorm. The last thing that Pippin saw as sleep took him was a dark glimpse of the old wizard on the floor, shielding a glowing chip in his gnarled hands between his knees. The flicker of a moment showed his sharp nose and a puff of smoke. It was Gandalf who roused them all from sleep. He had sat and watched all alone for about 6 hours and let the others rest. And in the watches I have made up my mind, he said. I do not like the feel of the middle way, and I do not like the smell of the left hand way. There is a foul air down there, or I am no guide. I shall take the right hand passage. It is time we began to climb up again. For 8 dark hours, not counting 2 brief halts, they marched on, and they met no danger, and heard nothing, and saw nothing but the faint gleam of the wizard's light, bobbing like a will-o'-the-wisp in the front of them. The passage they had chosen wound steadily upwards as far as they could judge it, when in great mounting curves as it rose, it grew loftier and wider. There were now no openings to other galleries or tunnels on either side, and the floor was level and sound, without pits or cracks. Evidently, they had struck what once had been an important road, and they went forward quicker than they had done on their first march. In this way, they advanced some 15 miles, measured in a direct line east, though they must have actually walked 20 miles or more. As the road climbed upwards, Frodo's spirits rose a little, but he still felt oppressed. And still at times he heard, or thought he heard, away behind the company and beyond the fall, a patter of their feet, a following footstep that was not an echo. They had marched as far as the hobbits could endure without a rest, and all were thinking of a place where they could sleep, when suddenly the walls to right and left vanished. They seemed to have passed through some arched doorway into a black and empty space. There was a great draught of warmer air behind them, and before them the darkness was cold on their faces. They halted and crowded anxiously together. Gandalf seemed pleased. I chose the right way, he said. At last, we are coming to the habitable parts, and I guess that we are not far now from the eastern side, but we are high up, a good deal higher than the Dimmerl Gate, unless I am mistaken. From the feeling of the air, we must be in a wide hall. I will now risk a little real light. He raised his staff, and for a brief instant there was a blaze like a flash of lightning. Great shadows sprang up and fled, and for a second they saw a vast reef far above their heads, upheld by many mighty pillars hewn of stone. Before them on either side stretched a huge empty hall. Its black walls, polished and smooth as glass, flashed and glittered. Three other entrances they saw, dark, black arches, one straight before them eastwards and one on either side. Then the light went out. That is all that I shall venture on for the present, said Gandalf. There used to be a great windows on the mountainside and shafts leading out to the light in the upper reaches of the mines. I think we have reached them now, but it's night outside again, and we cannot tell until morning. If I am right, tomorrow we may actually see the morning peeping in. But in the meanwhile, we had better go no further. Let us rest if we can. Things have gone well so far, and the, and the greater part of the dark road is over. But we are not through yet, and it is a long way down to the gates that open on the world. The company spent that night in the great cavernous hall. Huddled close together in a corner to escape the drunk. There seemed to be steady inflow of chill air through the eastern archway. All about them as they lay hung the darkness, hollow and immense, and oppressed by the they oppressed by the loneliness and vastness of the dolphin halls and endlessly branching stairs and passages. The wildest imaginings that dark rumor had ever suggested to the hobbits fell together, short of the actual dread and wonder of Moria. There must have been a mighty crowd of dwarfs here at one time, said Sam, and every one of them busier than badgers for 5 100 years to make all this, and most in hard rock too. What did they do it all for? They didn't live in these dark some holes, surely. These are not holes, said Gimli. This is the great realm and city of Dwarreldelf, and that and old it was not darksome. It was full of light and splendor, and is still remembered in our songs. He rose, and standing in the dark, he began to chant in a deep voice, while the echoes ran away into the roof. Oh, man. Mm. Hmm. 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 It's going right there. He gave us dimly. Let's dim it down. Mm. 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 Oh, okay. So he rose and standing in the dark, he began to chant in a deep voice, while the echoes ran away onto the reef. Okay, here we go. The world was young, the mountains green. No stain yet on the mountain was seen. No words were laid on stream or stone. When Durin woke and walked alone, he named the nameless hills and dales. He drank from yet untasted wells. He stooped and looked in mirror and saw a crown of stars appear, as gems upon a silver thread above the shadow of his head. The world was fair, the mountains tall, in elder days before the fall of mighty kings in North Gothron and Gondolin, who now beyond. The western seas have passed away. The world was fair in Durin's day. A king was on carven throne, and many pillared halls of stone, with golden roof and silver floor, and rings of power upon the door. The light of sun and star and moon, and shining lamps of crystal hue, undimmed by cloud or shade of night, there shone for ever fair and bright. There hammer on the anvil smote, there chisel, clove, engraver wrote, there forged was blade, and bound was hilt. The dilver mine, the mason built, there beryl, pearl, and opal pale, and metal wrought like fish's mail. buckler and corselet, axe and sword, and shining spears were laid in war. Unwearied then were Durin's foe. Beneath the mountains music's woe. The harper's harp, the minstrels sang, and the gates the trumpets rang. The world is gray, the mountains old. The forge's fire is ashen cold. No harp is rung, no hammer falls. The darkness dwells in Durin's halls. The shadow lies upon his tomb. In Moria, because of doom. But still, the sunken stars appear. In dark and windless narrow mirror. There lies his crown in water deep. Till Durin wakes again from sleep. I like that, said Sam. I should like to learn it in Moria and cause of dawn. But it makes the darkness seem heavier. Thinking of all those lamps. Are there piles of jewels and gold lying about here still? Gimli was silent. Having sung a song, he would say no more. Piles of jewels, said Gandalf. No, the orcs have often plundered Moria. There is nothing left in the upper halls. And since the dwarfs fled, no one dares to seek the shafts and treasures down in the deep places. They are drowned in water, are in a shadow of fear. Then what do the dwarves want to come back for? Asked Sam. For Mithril, answered Gandalf. The wealth of Moria was not in gold and jewels. The toys of the dwarves, nor in iron their servant. Such things they found here. It is true, especially iron. But they did not need to delve for them. All things that they desired they could obtain in traffic. Mm. Uh, but they did not need to delve for them. All things that they desired they could obtain in traffic. For here alone in the world was found Moria silver, or true silver, as some called it. Mithril is the elfish name. The dwarves have a name which they do not tell. Its worth was 10 times that gold, and now it is beyond price, for little is left above ground. And even the orcs dare not delve here for it. The loads lead away north towards Karatas, and down into darkness. The dwarfs tell no more tale, but even as Mithril was the foundation of the well, so also it was the destruction. They delved too greedily and too deep, and disturbed that from which they fled. Durin's bane. Of what they brought to light, the orcs have gathered nearly all, and given it in tribute to Sauron, who covets it. With real, all folk desired it. It could be beaten like copper and polished like glass, and the dwarfs could make of it a metal, light and yet harder than tempered steel. Its beauty was like that to that of common silver, but the beauty of Mithril did not tarnish or grow dim. The elves dearly loved it, and among many uses they made of it, Ansel then Star Moon, which he saw upon the doors. Bilbo had a corselet of mithril rings that Thorin gave him. I wonder what has become of it. Gathering dust still in Mikhail Gilbin mental house, I suppose. What? Cried Gimli, startled out of his silence. A corselet of Moria silver? That was a kingly gift. Yes, said Gandalf. I never told you, but its worth was greater than the value of the whole Shire and everything in it. Frodo said nothing, but he put his hand under his tunic and touched the ring of his mail shirt. He felt staggered to think that he had been walking about the price of the Shire under his jacket. Had Bilbo known? He felt no doubt that Bilbo knew quite well. It was indeed a kingly gift, but now his thoughts had been carried away from the dark mines to Rivendell, to Bilbo, and to Begin, and the days where, well, Bilbo was still there. He wished with all his heart that he was back there and in those days mowing the lawn or pottering among the flowers, and that he never heard of Moria or Mithril or the ring. A deep silence fell. One by one, the others fell asleep. Frodo was on guard, as if it were a breath that came in through unseen doors out of the place. Dread came over him. His hands were cold and his brow damp. He listened. All of his mind was given to listening and nothing else for 2 slow hours. But he heard no sound, not even the imagined echo of a football. His watch was nearly over, and far off where he guessed that the western archway stood, he fancied that he could see 2 pale points of light, almost like luminous eyes. He started. His head nodded. I must have nearly fallen asleep on guard, he thought. I was on the edge of a dream. He stood up and rubbed his eyes and remained standing, peering into the dark until he was relieved by Legolas. When he lay down, he quickly went to sleep. But he seemed to him that the dream went on. He heard whispers and saw the 2 pale points of light approaching slowly. Oh, he woke and found that the others were speaking softly near him, and that the dim light was falling on his face. High up above the eastern archway, through the shaft near the roof, came a long pale gleam, and across the hall through the northern arch, light also glimmered faint and distantly. Frodo sat up. Good morning, said Gandalf, for morning it is again at last. I was right, you see. We were high up on the east side of Moria. Before today is over, we ought to find the great gates and see the waters of Mirror lying hmm, in the Grim Real Dale before us. Oh, I shall be glad, said Gimli. I have looked on Moria, and it is very great, but it has become dark and dreadful, and we have found no sign of my kindred. I doubt now that Balin ever came here. After they had breakfasted, Gandalf decided to go on again at once. We are tired, but we shall rest better when we are outside, he said. I think that none of us will wish to spend another night in Moria. No, indeed, said Boromir. Which way shall we take? Yonder eastward arch? Maybe, said Gandalf, but I do not know yet exactly where we are, unless I am quite astray. I guess that we are above and to the north of the great gates, and it may not be easy to find the right road down to them. The eastern arch will probably prove to be the way that we must take. But before we make up our minds, we ought to look about us. Let us go towards the light in the north door. If we could find a window, it would help. But I fear that light comes only down in deep shafts. Following his lead, the company passed under the northern arch. They found themselves in a wide corridor, and they went along the glimmer. As they went along it, the glimmer grew stronger, and they saw that it came through a doorway on their right. It was high and flat topped, and the stone door was still upon its hinges, standing half open. Beyond it was a large square chamber. It was dimly lit, but to their eyes, after so long a time in the dark, it seemed dazzlingly bright, and they blinked as they entered. Their feet disturbed a deep dust upon the floor, and stumbled among things lying in the doorway, whose shapes they could not at first make out. The chamber was lit by a wide shaft high in the further eastern wall. It slanted upwards, and far above a small square patch of blue sky could be seen. The light of the shaft fell directly on a table in the middle of the room. A single oblong block about 2 feet high, upon which was laid a great slab of white stone. It looks like a tomb, muttered Frodo, and went forwards with a curious sense of foreboding. To look more closely at it, Gandalf came quickly to his side. On the slab, runes were deeply graven. These are Darren's runes, such as were used of old in Moria, said Gandalf. Here is written in the tongues of men and dwarves. Balin, son of Fúden, lord of Moria. He is dead then, said Frodo. I feared it was so. Gimli cast his hood over his face. Okay, so this is the grave marker. Okay, people, that's the grave marker. the last page, you should have this in your last posting. Yesterday. Yeah. Yeah. You should already had this one. You should have. That should have. There you go. Does that ring a bell? There you go. That one. You may want to refresh your memory on that one. On the YouTube wall. And also, the other, what do you call it? Leaves from the Book of Mazabul. That is there too. So, you may want to refer to those also. The next chapter is chapter 5, The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. Khazad-dûm. Where did they go, people? Are they off the map? Oh, shit. Guys, what's the bridge? What's the bridge, people? What is the bridge? I'm gonna look on the real map and see if I can find something. Listen to something. I don't know, guys. I'm gonna have to refer to your map because Dunland, if it's Dunland, we're a little farther down. Okay, so that's it again. But anyway, guys, I'm going to call it a night, and I'm glad that we had finally finished this. And I know we had a little action up in there. I gotta admit, we had a little action. Oh my God, that was kind of scary for a little bit. I don't know about you. I was fearful for these heroes. I didn't know what was going to happen. But they had their Gandalf PSs on, but that's all I got to say. Um, the Bridge of Clouds of Doom is going to be a short read. Believe it or not, it's going to be a short read. Chapter 5. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, 20 pages. 20 pages. 20 pages. Yeah. So anyway, I will let you go and safe travels, my friends, and we're going to go and see what's going to happen next time. But anyway, talk about where they're at. If you see it, you know where they're really at. But I know one thing. Oh my God. They gotta be still in the Demerald Dale. Demerald Dale. They gotta be in the Demerald Dale right there. They gotta be there, people. Because remember, that's it. It's gotta be there. That's where the great gates are. Well, y'all may discuss it among yourselves. Well, just kind of state it in your, if you repost the reads or whatever, you may want to allow yourself that, but your comments may show up if you repost or whatever. You could discuss it among yourself. Have a little discussion group. Talk about it. Talk about what is within the read. Where are they? What are they doing? What happened? Well, anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and let everyone go. Later, guys.